You wake up. You're not tired. You slept well. You have breakfast, reply to messages, do what needs to be done. The day goes by without any major problems. You do what you should do. You eat, you work, you converge, you go home. Everything worked out, nothing failed. And then, in the silence of the late night, as you scroll through your feed before bed, something settles in your chest. It's not sadness, it's not anxiety. It's a feeling you can't name, as if everything is in the right place, but on some deep level, completely out of place. You close your phone. You look at the ceiling. You think, everything is fine. Why does nothing seem enough? This question doesn't come out of nowhere. It was there all along, but you kept avoiding it. Because acknowledging it would mean admitting that something is fundamentally wrong. Not with your routine, not with your choices, but with the very logic that organizes it all. 150 years ago, a man mapped this emptiness with surgical precision. He didn't write for philosophy professors. He wrote for you, who feels this fissure and doesn't know where it comes from. Fyodor Dostoevsky was not just a writer. He was someone who spent 4 years in a labor camp in Siberia, living alongside murderers, rapists, men shattered by life. He was someone who, minutes before being executed, received a pardon and carried with him forever the memory of having looked death in the face. He was someone who understood before Freud, before Nietzsche, before any modern psychologist, how the human mind works when no one is looking. And what he saw was not pretty. He saw that you don't act logically, that your decisions are not rational, that you are capable of knowing exactly what you should do and choosing the opposite just to prove you can. He saw that freedom is not liberation, it is a burden, and that most people, when faced with total responsibility for their own lives, will do anything to escape. He saw what you feel now, that feeling that something doesn't fit, that you are following a script you never consciously chose, that your life is being lived on autopilot, and when you stop to think about it, the question comes back, heavier, more uncomfortable. What am I doing here? What does this mean? Dostoevsky wrote about characters who ask questions like these, and none of them get easy answers because there are no easy answers. But there is something more valuable than answers, there is recognition. There is a character he created, an anonymous, isolated man who spends his days writing bitter notes about his own existence. He's not important, he's not successful, he has not changed the world. He's just someone who's extremely lucid, and that lucidity has destroyed him. He knows what he should do to improve his life. He knows exactly, but he doesn't do it. Not because he is lazy, but because doing the obvious would be admitting that he is predictable, that he can be reduced to a pattern, that he is just another ordinary human being trying to be happy. And he prefers to be unhappy, but free. He prefers to suffer, but knowing that he chose it. Because the only thing worse than suffering is the feeling that you have no control over anything. This character has a name, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that he is you, or at least a part of you that you don't want to admit exists. The part that knows what to do but doesn't do it. The part that analyzes everything to the point of paralysis. The part that prefers to stand still rather than risk being wrong. The part that has given up before even trying, because trying would mean exposing yourself to judgment from others and worse, from yourself. Dostoevsky called this the man in the underground. And he wasn't talking about a literary character. He was diagnosing a condition that decades later would become the norm. Because the modern world has taught you to think too much. It has taught you that if you analyze enough, you will find the right answer. It has taught you that the solution to any problem is more information, more clarity, more understanding. But Dostoevsky discovered something disturbing. The more you understand, the less you act. The more lucid you become, the more reasons you find not to do anything. The more conscious you become, the more fragmented you become, observing yourself from the outside, judging every impulse, questioning every feeling, until nothing seems genuine anymore. And then you arrive at the point where you are now, knowing too much, feeling too little, living on autopilot while an inner voice whispers that something essential has been lost. Dostoevsky did not write to comfort you. He wrote to show you what you already know but have been avoiding facing. And what he has to say is simple but devastating. You are not lost because you don't know the way. You are lost because you know, and you don't want to follow, because following would require trust. And you have learned never to trust anything completely. Not God, not people, not even yourself. This distrust is not sophistication. It is paralysis disguised as prudence. And 150 years ago, a man who was shot and forgiven at the last second, who slept alongside murderers and understood that they were not monsters, just humans too free to bear the weight of their own freedom. That man mapped out exactly what you are feeling right now. Not to solve it, but so that you can stop pretending you don't feel it. What you just felt was mapped out 150 years ago by someone who lived through hell before understanding it. Dostoevsky created a character who would forever change the way we understand the human mind. Not a hero, not a villain, just an ordinary man who thinks too much to live. He has no name. He doesn't need one, because he is not an individual. He is a diagnosis. This man lives alone. He worked for years as a civil servant, saved money, retired early. Now he spends his days writing bitter notes about the nature of existence. He is intelligent, extremely intelligent. He understands psychology better than psychologists. He understands society better than sociologists. He understands himself better than any therapist could ever understand him. And that is exactly why he cannot live. Because every time he feels something, anger, desire, hope, his mind immediately begins to dissect that feeling. He questions its legitimacy. He anticipates how others will judge him. He analyzes the hidden motivations behind the emotion. And by the time he finishes this analysis, the original feeling has disappeared, replaced by something completely different. Usually, self-hatred. He wants to leave the house and socialize. But before he leaves, his mind has already gone through all the possible forms of embarrassment that could occur. He has already anticipated every disapproving look. He has already imagined every awkward silence. And in the end, he convinces himself that it's better to stay home. Not because he's afraid, but because he can predict the fear. He knows he should exercise, improve his health, establish healthy routines. But when he starts exercising, his mind begins to analyze. Why am I doing this? To impress others? To feel superior? To escape death? All these motivations are pathetic. And he stops. Not out of laziness, out of excess of consciousness. Dostoevsky called this sick consciousness. And he wasn't being metaphorical. Consciousness, this ability to observe yourself thinking, should be humanity's greatest gift. It should set us free, make us wise, allow us to choose who we want to be. But the man in the underground discovered something terrible. Consciousness can turn against itself. It can become a prison where you are trapped observing your own life from the outside, unable to truly live, because you are too busy analyzing the act of living. You know that feeling. How many times have you known exactly what you needed to do? Call someone, start a project, have a difficult conversation, and simply didn't do it? Not because you didn't have time, not because you lacked the ability, but because the moment you thought about doing it, your mind had already constructed 12 layers of analysis about why you were thinking about doing it, and all that analysis undermined the action before it could even happen. The man in the basement doesn't suffer from a lack of information. He suffers from an excess of information about himself. He has become a stranger to himself, divided into two parts, one that acts and feels, the other that observes and judges. And the part that observes always wins, because it is faster, more articulate, more rational. But this rationality is a sham, because deep down, all these analyses are not a search for truth. They are protection. Protection against the risk of being wrong, against the risk of being rejected, against the risk of trying something genuine and discovering that you are not as special as you would like to believe. It is safer not to try, and then convince yourself that you did not try because you are too smart to fall for illusions such as effort, hope, or human connection. Dostoevsky saw this decades before any psychologist gave a name to the phenomenon. He understood that the modern mind does not suffer from ignorance. It suffers from toxic lucidity. You think too much to act. You know too much to trust. You understand too much to allow yourself to be vulnerable. And the result? Paralysis. A sophisticated paralysis disguised as wisdom. The man in the underground developed elaborate theories about why socializing is superficial, why love is an illusion, why any human effort is ridiculous in the face of the inevitability of death. He turns his inability to act into philosophical superiority. And maybe you do the same. Perhaps you have developed a very clever explanation for why you don't do what you know you should do. Perhaps you have turned your paralysis into identity. Perhaps you have convinced yourself that your hesitation is prudence, your inaction is wisdom, your loneliness is a conscious choice. But Dostoevsky doesn't buy that story. And he forces you not to buy it either, because he shows that the man in the underground is not happy. He is not wise. He is not free. He is miserable. He hates himself. And he hates himself precisely because he can't stop analyzing himself. Every thought generates a meta-thought. Every feeling generates an analysis of the feeling. Every impulse is dissected until it loses all vitality. And in the end, what is left? A human being who understands everything and feels nothing genuinely. Who knows what he should do and cannot do it. Who is biologically alive but existentially dead. This is not depression. Depression takes away your ability to think. This is the opposite. It is thought that has taken away your ability to live. And here's the scariest part. Dostoevsky wrote this in 1864, before Freud, before modern psychology, before we had words like social anxiety, overthinking, analysis paralysis. He saw it coming. He saw that the modern world, with its emphasis on education, rationality, and self-awareness, was creating a new kind of human, the overly conscious human, capable of understanding everything, but incapable of doing anything genuinely. And he was right. How many people do you know who seem to have everything figured out in theory, but whose lives are completely stagnant, who know exactly what they need to do, but year after year remain in the same place? The problem is not a lack of knowledge. It is an excess of awareness without action. And that brings us to what is even more disturbing. Why does this happen? Why do you act against your own interests? Why do you know what you need to do, but do the opposite? Why has your mind, which should be your greatest ally, become your greatest enemy? Dostoevsky discovered that the answer is not in logic. It lies in something much deeper and much more uncomfortable. What if the problem is not that you don't know what to do, but that you don't want to do the obvious? Because doing the obvious would be admitting that you are predictable, that you can be reduced to patterns, that you are not as special as you need to believe you are? What if all this analysis is not a search for truth, but rebellion in disguise? Rebellion against the idea that you can be understood, categorized, solved, because to accept that would be to accept that you are like everyone else. And if there is one thing the modern mind cannot tolerate, it is the idea of being ordinary. So you choose paralysis, because paralysis at least is yours. It proves that you are not a robot programmed for happiness. It preserves your illusion of uniqueness. And Dostoevsky looks at you and whispers, "You think you are free, but you are just trapped in a cage you built yourself." But if we think too much, perhaps it's because we believe that thinking solves problems. Dostoevsky discovered that it doesn't. There is another character. This one has a name. Rodion Raskolnikov, a law student, intelligent, poor but not miserable. He spends months locked in his tiny room developing a theory. The theory is simple, almost elegant. Humanity is divided into two types of people: the ordinary, who obey the laws, and the extraordinary, like Napoleon, who have the right to break laws to achieve great goals. If you are extraordinary, common morality does not apply to you. Raskolnikov decides to test whether he belongs to the second group. He chooses a victim, an old moneylender, an exploiter who lends money at exorbitant interest rates and makes the lives of many even more miserable. He decides to kill her, not out of hatred, not out of desperate need, but to prove a philosophical point. If he can kill without remorse, it will prove that he is extraordinary, and her money can be used to help the poor, including his own family. It's a perfect utilitarian calculation, one worthless life exchanged for many improved lives. He spends weeks planning, every detail, every variable. The plan is rational, calculated, logical, and then he kills, and everything falls apart. Not because he was caught, but because something inside him shatters, something that no theory, no argument, no logic could have predicted. He begins to fall ill, fever, delusions, not from conscious guilt, but from something deeper, something prior to reason, something that reason cannot control or eliminate. Dostoevsky is showing you something crucial. Human beings are not rational. They are rationalizers. Raskolnikov did not kill because his logic was impeccable. He killed because he needed to prove himself superior, because he couldn't stand the idea of being just another poor and insignificant student, because philosophical theory was only the socially acceptable excuse for a much more primitive impulse, the desire for absolute power over life and death. Logic was just the cover. The real driving force was emotional, psychological, unconscious. And when you act like this, when you use reason to justify something that comes from a much darker place, the result is inevitable: internal collapse. You've done this before. You don't have to have killed anyone, but you've made a destructive decision and built an impeccable rational justification for it. You've sabotaged a relationship and convinced yourself it was for the right reason. You've avoided an opportunity and created a logical explanation for why it was better that way. You've hurt someone and turned it into a defensible moral position. Dostoevsky is saying, that logic you used, it was a lie. Not in the sense that it was logically flawed. It could even have been logically coherent, but it was a lie because it wasn't the real reason. The real reason was buried somewhere you didn't want to look. This destroys the foundation of everything the modern world has taught you. You were raised to believe that if you understand things logically, you will make better decisions. That if you study enough, inform yourself enough, plan enough, you will avoid mistakes. But Dostoevsky shows that this is an illusion, because reason does not rule. It only justifies whatever you have already decided to do for reasons that even you do not fully understand. Raskolnikov had a perfect argument, and yet he destroyed his own life. Because arguments don't change who you are. They only change how you explain what you were already inclined to do, How many times have you been absolutely clear about what you should do and done the opposite, and then invented a reason that made sense? Dostoevsky is not saying that reason is useless. He is saying that it is limited, dangerously limited, because it can convince you of anything, including terrible things. The worst horrors in history were not committed by irrational people. They were committed by extremely rational people who had sophisticated arguments to justify what they did. Totalitarian regimes did not say, let's kill millions because we are evil. They said, let's kill millions because it is necessary for historical progress, for the greater good, for the construction of a perfect society. They had theories, arguments, logic, and Dostoevsky predicted this decades before it happened. Because he understood that reason, disconnected from something deeper, compassion, moral intuition, recognition of one's own fallibility, becomes the most dangerous tool there is. Raskolnikov, after killing, tries to continue believing in his theory. He repeats the arguments to himself, but his body does not obey. The fever comes. Delusion set in. Something inside him knows that he has violated something fundamental, something that no philosophical theory can erase. And here's the devastating insight. You cannot rationalize your way out of something that was irrational from the start. Whether the real motive was power, control, fear, envy, and no amount of logic will cure that. You will only become more sophisticated at lying to yourself. Dostoevsky shows that the problem is not thinking. It is believing that thinking is enough. You think that if you understand why you sabotage yourself, you will stop sabotaging yourself. But understanding doesn't change anything, because what drives you is not understanding. It is something much more visceral, much older, much more beyond your conscious control. And that is terrifying, because it means you are not the master of your own mind. You are at best an observer with limited control. There are forces operating within you that you did not choose, do not fully control, and may never fully understand. And these forces are more powerful than any logical argument you can construct. Raskolnikov only begins to heal when he stops trying to justify himself logically, when he finally accepts that he killed not because of a theory, but because of something broken inside him, something that needs redemption, not rationalization. And maybe you need the same thing. Maybe you need to stop trying to logically understand why you are the way you are. Stop searching for the perfect explanation. Stop believing that if you can name the problem, it will go away. Because there are things in you that cannot be solved by analysis. They can only be transformed by something completely different, something that reason alone will never achieve. And when you realize this, when you truly realize that your mind is not as reliable as you thought, that your motives are not as pure as you would like, that your logic is often just an excuse for impulses you don't want to admit, then you begin to understand why so many people prefer to completely abdicate the responsibility of thinking for themselves. Because if thinking doesn't guarantee truth, if analyzing doesn't guarantee self-knowledge, if planning doesn't guarantee success, then why carry that burden? Why not let someone else decide for you? And when reason fails, what is left? The temptation to surrender freedom. Dostoevsky created the most disturbing parable ever written about power, freedom, and human nature. It is not a philosophical essay. It is a story within a story, told by Ivan Karamazov, the brilliant atheist who cannot accept a world where children suffer. The scene takes place in 16th century Spain, during the Inquisition. Christ returns to earth. He makes no announcement. He gives no speeches. He simply walks the streets of Seville, and people recognize him immediately. He heals, he comforts, he brings back a dead child. And then the Grand Inquisitor, the most powerful man in the church, orders his arrest. That night, the Inquisitor visits Christ in his cell, and he makes a speech that exposes the most uncomfortable truth about humanity. Most people don't want freedom. They want security. The Inquisitor accuses Christ of having made a fundamental mistake. He offered human beings something they cannot bear, the responsibility to choose for themselves. In the desert, when the devil tempted Christ, he made 3 offers, and Christ rejected them all. First offer, turn stones into bread, solve the problem of hunger, ensure that no one ever had to worry about basic survival. Christ refused, saying that man does not live by bread alone. The Inquisitor replies, you were wrong. Most people care only about bread. They have no mental space for spiritual questions when they are hungry. By refusing to give bread, you condemn most of humanity to live in constant anxiety about their material needs. Second offer, prove your divinity through an undeniable miracle. Throw yourself from the temple and have the angels save you so that no one could doubt. Christ refused, saying that faith must be free, not forced by evidence. The Inquisitor replies, you were wrong. People hate doubt. They want certainty. They want proof. By refusing to give undeniable proof, you condemn them to a lifetime of torment between belief and disbelief. Third offer, dominion over all the kingdoms of the earth, absolute political power to create a perfect society. Christ refused, saying that his kingdom was not of this world. The inquisitor replies, "You are wrong. People need order, structure, someone to make decisions for them. Without a strong leader, they fall into conflict, war, chaos. By refusing political power, you abandon them to violence and disorder. And then comes the final accusation. You wanted men to follow you freely, moved only by love. But you overestimated humanity. Freedom is a burden that most cannot bear. We, the church, corrected your mistake. We give people bread through charity. We give certainty through doctrine. We give order through authority. And in return, they willingly surrender their freedom to us. This is not theory. It is a diagnosis of the present. How many times have you wished that someone would just tell you what to do? That would eliminate the need to choose, to take risks, to make mistakes? How many times have you felt relieved to follow a guru, a system, an ideology, anything that promised absolute clarity and eliminated ambiguity? How many times have you traded freedom for comfort without even realizing it? Dostoevsky is not just talking about religion. He is talking about any system that promises security in exchange for obedience. It could be a political ideology that explains everything and tells you exactly who the good guys and bad guys are. It could be an algorithm that chooses what you see, what you think, what you want, and you're grateful for it because it eliminates the fatigue of deciding. It could be a charismatic leader who promises to solve all your problems if you just trust him completely. The structure is always the same. Give up your freedom. We'll take care of everything. You'll be happy. And it works, because most people want that. Freedom hurts. Freedom means total responsibility. It means that when things go wrong, you can't blame anyone but yourself. It means living with uncertainty, with doubt, with the constant possibility of being wrong. Security, on the other hand, is comfortable. Security means that someone else has decided for you. If it goes wrong, it's the fault of the person who decided, not yours. You can sleep peacefully knowing that you don't have to question, you don't have to choose, you don't have to carry the weight. The Grand Inquisitor is not a villain. He genuinely believes he is helping humanity. He sees people suffering under the weight of freedom and decides to alleviate that suffering. And people love him for it. But Christ, after hearing the whole speech, does not respond with words. He just approaches the old Inquisitor and kisses him gently on the cheek, and then he leaves in silence. That kiss is the answer, not an argument, not a logical refutation, just love. Love that does not force, love that does not control, love that respects the freedom even of the man who is trying to destroy freedom. Dostoevsky is saying something devastating. The choice between freedom and security cannot be resolved logically. It is an existential choice that each person must make. And most choose security. Look around you. How many people do you know who really want to be free? Not just say they want freedom, but actually bear the weight of it. Most people want the illusion of freedom. They want to feel like they are choosing, but in reality they want their choices to come pre-approved, pre-validated, pre-decided. They want freedom without consequences, choice without responsibility, autonomy without risk. And when that impossible combination doesn't materialize, when real freedom appears with all its weight and uncertainty, most people run back into the arms of those who promise certainty. You do this. Maybe not in an obvious way, but you do. Every time you seek external validation before trusting your own judgment. Every time you follow a ready-made formula instead of experimenting. Every time you outsource your decisions to an expert, an algorithm, an authority, you are trading freedom for security. And there is nothing wrong with that if you admit that is what you are doing. The problem is when you do that and continue to believe you are free. When you live inside a cage and convince yourself that the cage is the whole world. Dostoevsky knew this would happen. He predicted decades in advance how entire societies would embrace totalitarian systems, how intelligent, educated, well-meaning people would choose leaders who promised to eliminate uncertainty, solve all problems, and all they asked in return was total obedience. Fascism, communism, fundamentalism, personality cults. No matter the ideological guise, the structure is always the same. Trust us completely and you will never have to be afraid again. And millions accept it, because fear of uncertainty is stronger than love of freedom. And perhaps, if you are honest, you would accept it too, under certain conditions. If the fear were great enough, if the promise of security were convincing enough, because you are not so different. You were just lucky enough not to be tested to the limit. The Grand Inquisitor ends his speech by saying to Christ, "You gave us freedom, but we corrected it. And now men are happy." But there is something unsaid in this statement. Men are happy, but are they alive? Or are they just comfortably anesthetized, protected from risk and pain, but also from the possibility of greatness, of true love, of deep meaning? Because you can't have total security and deep meaning at the same time. Meaning requires risk. Love requires vulnerability. Growth requires the possibility of failure. If you eliminate risk, you eliminate everything that makes life worth living. And here's the question that Dostoevsky forces you to answer. Do you prefer a safe and empty life or a free and uncertain life? Don't answer quickly, because your life answers for you. Look at your real choices, not your intentions, your actions. How many times have you chosen the safe path instead of the true path? How many times have you silenced something inside you to fit in, to not take risks, to not disturb? If you systematically choose safety, you are not free. You are just comfortable. And comfort, Dostoevsky whispers, is the opiate that modernity offers in exchange for your soul. But there is something even more disturbing that he wants to show you. Because maybe the problem isn't just that you run away from freedom. Maybe the problem is what you would do with freedom if you really had it. But if we run away from freedom, it's because something inside us knows we are capable of evil. That's the part no one wants to hear. The part that even the bravest philosophers avoid looking at directly. But Dostoevsky doesn't shy away. He forces you to face it. Evil is not a flaw in the system. It is not a product of ignorance. It is not the result of poor social conditions or lack of education. Evil is a choice that any free human being is capable of making. Dostoevsky spent 4 years in a Siberian prison living with murderers, rapists, men who had committed unimaginable atrocities. He expected to find monsters. He expected to find people fundamentally different from him. But what he found was worse. Normal people, intelligent, some even charming, capable of kindness in certain circumstances. They were not demons. They were humans. Humans who had made terrible choices and then constructed narratives to justify those choices. And that meant something terrifying. If they were normal humans, then any human was capable of what they did, including you. Don't like hearing that? Dostoevsky doesn't care what you like to hear. He cares about what is true. And the truth is that you carry within you the capacity for terrible acts. Not because you are especially evil, but because you are human. And free humans can choose anything, including evil. Raskolnikov kills, not out of necessity, not out of insanity, but because he chose to prove that he was extraordinary. Because he wanted to feel absolute power over life and death. Because something in him wanted to know what it would be like. Smerdyakov in The Brothers Karamazov kills his own father, not in a fit of rage, but coldly, methodically, after being intellectually encouraged by Ivan, who said that if God does not exist, everything is permitted. Smerdyakov just took logic to its conclusion. If there is no God, there is no objective morality. If there is no objective morality, why not do what serves your interests? Ivan didn't kill, but he created the intellectual justification, and Smerdyakov carried it out. Who is more guilty? Dostoevsky shows that evil rarely appears as an obvious monster. It appears as justification, as rationalization, as a sophisticated argument. It appears when you convince yourself that your cruelty is justice, that your manipulation is protection, that your selfishness is necessary self-care. You don't have to kill to understand this. Have you ever justified hurting someone by saying it was for the truth? Have you ever destroyed something good because you couldn't stand it existing without you? Have you ever sabotaged someone because their success made you feel small? And when you did that, you didn't think, I'm going to do something bad now. You thought, I'm doing what needs to be done. You had reasons. You constructed a narrative where you were the hero, or at least the justified victim. That's the real mechanics of evil. Not people who wake up wanting to destroy. People who convince themselves that their destructiveness is something noble. And the scariest thing, the smarter you are, the better you can do it. Raskolnikov was intelligent. Ivan was brilliant. The Grand Inquisitor was wise. And they all caused destruction justified by sophisticated ideas. Dostoevsky saw that the greatest danger does not come from the ignorant. It comes from the educated who use their intelligence to construct moral justifications for the unjustifiable. This applies to you. How many times have you used your intelligence not to seek truth, but to defend something you already wanted to do? How many times have you constructed an impeccable moral argument to mask a selfish desire? The human mind is capable of justifying anything. Genocides have been justified. Torture has been justified. Betrayals have been justified. All with arguments that made sense to those who constructed them. And if other people can do it, you can do it. You are not special. You are not immune. Under the right circumstances, with the right pressures, with the right justifications, you would be capable of things you now consider unimaginable. Dostoevsky does not let you escape this truth, because escaping it is what allows evil to continue happening. If you believe that evil is something only bad people do, you will never recognize evil when you do it. You will always have a story where you are justified. But if you accept that you are capable of evil, that there is something in you, something free, something uncontrollable, that can choose destruction. Then you become vigilant. You doubt your own justifications. You question your own motives. And that is uncomfortable, extremely uncomfortable. It's easier to believe that you're a good person who sometimes makes mistakes, that your intentions are pure, that if you hurt someone it was accidental or unavoidable. But Dostoevsky doesn't allow for that comfort. He shows you that intention doesn't matter as much as you think. What matters is choice, and you choose moment after moment who you're going to be. And sometimes you choose badly, not by accident, but because at that moment, something in you wanted to choose badly, maybe out of revenge, maybe out of pride, maybe just to feel powerful, maybe because doing the right thing would require a sacrifice you weren't willing to make. This is the freedom that the Grand Inquisitor wanted to take away from people. Because with freedom comes the possibility of choosing evil, and most people, he argues, cannot handle that possibility. So it's better to take away the choice, make people obedient, protect them from themselves. But Dostoevsky rejects this, because taking away freedom does not eliminate evil, it only centralizes it. Evil passes from the hands of many to the hands of the few who now have absolute power, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Not because bad people seek power, but because power turns normal people into bad people, when you don't have to be accountable, when you can't be questioned, when your decisions affect millions but you don't suffer the consequences. You stop seeing others as humans. You start seeing them as pieces on a board, numbers, abstractions, and then any atrocity becomes possible, because it's not against people. It's in the name of a greater idea. Dostoevsky saw it coming. He predicted how 20th century ideologies would kill millions in the name of progress, racial purity, workers' paradise, because he understood that the danger wasn't in the obvious monsters. It was in the intelligent, idealistic people who genuinely believed they were saving the world. And you're not immune to that. If you believe strongly enough that you are on the right side of history, you are capable of terrible things against those you see as obstacles. If that scares you, it should scare you, because it means you are beginning to understand. And here's what matters most now. You can't stop here, because if you stop now, you're left with only the weight, only the diagnosis, only with the awareness that you are capable of evil. And that can paralyze you, or worse, it can make you cynical. If everyone is capable of evil, then whatever. But Dostoevsky doesn't stop there. He shows you what comes next. He shows you that recognizing your capacity for evil is not the end. It's the beginning of the only thing that can truly save you. But to get there, you must first pass through the darkest valley of all. But if evil exists within us, why is there so much innocent suffering? That is the question that destroys everything. The question that no philosophy, no theology, no ideology has answered satisfactorily. And Dostoevsky does not attempt to answer it. He presents it in its most brutal, most inescapable form through Ivan Karamazov, perhaps the most honest character he ever created. Ivan is an atheist, but not because of philosophical skepticism, not because he cannot accept the existence of God intellectually. Ivan is an atheist because of moral rebellion. He looks at the world and sees children being tortured, and he cannot accept a universe where this is allowed by a God who claims to be loving and omnipotent. Ivan collects real stories of child suffering, not to provoke, but because he needs to confront reality without filters. A 5-year-old girl is beaten by her parents, locked in a freezing toilet all night in winter. She cries, she prays. She beats her little hands on her chest asking God to save her. God does not answer. An 8-year-old boy accidentally injures a general's favorite dog. The general orders his hunting dogs to tear the boy apart alive while his mother watches. God does not intervene. Ivan presents story after story, not philosophical hypotheses, real events, concrete suffering, children who did nothing wrong, who had no choice, who were just born in the wrong place, in the wrong family, at the wrong time. And then he asks the question why. Not how does this fit into the divine plan, not what lesson does this teach, but simply why is this allowed? All the traditional theological answers are insufficient for Ivan. God works in mysterious ways? No. A God who allows children to be tortured and calls it a mystery is not worthy of worship. Suffering builds character? No. Small children have no character to build. They just suffer. Will there be compensation in heaven? No. No future compensation justifies present torture. If the final harmony of the universe requires a single child's tear, then that harmony is obscene. Ivan is not asking for proof of God's existence. He is doing something more radical. He is rejecting the world that God created. It's not that I don't accept God, says Ivan. I just respectfully return the ticket. He does not want to participate in a universe built on the suffering of innocence. Even if everything works out in the end, even if there is cosmic harmony, even if heaven compensates for everything, because the price is too high. And Dostoevsky does not refute Ivan. He validates Ivan's revolt, because Ivan is right, morally right. If there is a God who allows innocent suffering, that God is either not good or not omnipotent. And if he is neither good nor omnipotent, why call him God? That is the question you cannot answer logically. And Dostoevsky knows it, because he lived it. He saw undeserved suffering. He suffered unjustly. He was seconds away from being executed for a crime that was not really a crime. And when he looked at the barrels of the guns pointed at his chest, knowing that in a few moments his consciousness would be erased forever, what did he feel? Not peace, not divine acceptance, pure terror. And then at the last second, forgiveness came. But he carried the memory of that terror with him forever. The memory that God, if he exists, does not always intervene. In fact, he almost never intervenes. So why believe? Ivan presents his answer. There is no reason. To believe would be moral complicity with suffering. It would be to accept the unacceptable. And part of you agrees with Ivan, the honest part. The part that cannot simply ignore the suffering you see around you. How many times have you watched the news and thought, where is God in this? How many times have you seen someone innocent suffering and felt anger at a universe that allows this? And then what did you do? Did you suppress your anger? Did you accept some convenient theological explanation? Or did you simply look away because thinking about it was too painful? Ivan doesn't look away. He holds his gaze, and it destroys him. Because having no answer for innocent suffering isn't just an intellectual problem. It's an unbearable existential burden. If there is no God, then there is no cosmic justice. Suffering is random. Evil often wins. And when you die, that's it. There is no compensation. There is no meaning. Only emptiness. But if there is a God, then he is an accomplice. He chooses not to intervene. And that's worse, because it means that suffering has a witness who could prevent it, but chooses not to. Ivan is stuck between these two options, and both are unbearable. Without God, nihilism, despair, total loss of meaning. With God, moral revolt, cosmic betrayal, impossibility of reconciliation. And Dostoevsky offers no easy way out, because there is no easy way out. He just shows you that this is the crossroads where every honest human being eventually arrives. You can avoid this crossroads for a while. You can distract yourself. You can construct comfortable narratives. You can avoid looking directly at suffering. But eventually, if you are honest, you will have to choose. Do you accept a universe where innocent people suffer, or do you reject it? And if you accept it, with what justification? And if you reject it, how do you live after that? Ivan tried to live with rejection, and it drove him mad. Because you cannot sustain pure nihilism without falling apart internally. But you also cannot simply accept it. You cannot simply say, God knows what he is doing when you see a child suffering. You are stuck without an answer, without peace. And it is precisely there, in that despair, in that emptiness, in that impossibility, that Dostoevsky shows you that there may be a third way. Not an answer, but a choice, an absurd choice, irrational. One that does not solve Ivan's question, but one that allows you to live despite it. Dostoevsky offers no easy way out, because there is no easy way out. But he shows you that perhaps there is a third way, not an answer, but a choice represented by Alyosha Karamazov, Ivan's brother, the perfect opposite, not out of ignorance, not out of naivety, but out of something much more radical. Alyosha listens to everything Ivan says. He does not refute it. He does not present sophisticated theological counter-arguments. He does not try to convince Ivan that the suffering of children has some hidden justification. He simply chooses to believe anyway. And that seems absurd. It seems intellectually dishonest. It seems like a surrender of reason. But Dostoevsky is showing something deeper. Faith is not a logical conclusion. It is an existential gamble. Alyosha has no proof that God is good. He has no evidence that suffering has meaning. He has no guarantees that everything will work out in the end. He has only one choice, to trust or not to trust. And he chooses to trust, not because the evidence convinces him, but because the alternative, living without trust, without hope, without the possibility of meaning, is unbearable. This is not the faith of catechisms. It is not the faith of dogmatic certainties. It is the faith that Pascal described as a wager. You bet your life in one direction knowing that you may be wrong, but accepting the risk because the alternative is worse. Ivan chose absolute intellectual honesty, and it led him to despair and madness. Alyosha chose trust, and it led him to compassion, to practical love, to the ability to endure suffering without being destroyed by it. Neither choice is proven to be correct. Both are wagers, and you have to choose. Because staying in the middle, trying to be sure before acting, trying to logically solve the unsolvable, trying to have faith without risk, that doesn't work. That's just paralysis disguised as prudence. Dostoevsky is saying, You won't be sure. Never. So choose anyway. Choose to believe that suffering can be transformed, or choose to believe that it's just random chaos. But choose and live with the consequences of your choice. Alyosha isn't happy all the time. He isn't protected from suffering. He suffers. He doubts. He goes through a brutal crisis when his spiritual mentor, Father Zosima, dies and his body begins to rot quickly, something that in Russian Orthodox tradition was seen as a sign that the person was not a saint. Alyosha feels as if God has betrayed him, as if everything he believed in was a lie. And then in that moment of utter despair, he has a mystical experience. Not proof, not an argument, just a feeling, intense, overwhelming, that there is something beyond visible suffering, that love is real even when it seems defeated. And that is enough, not because it eliminates doubt, but because it gives strength to continue despite the doubt. This is Dostoevsky's faith, a faith that does not eliminate Ivan, but that chooses Alyosha anyway. And you've experienced this, maybe not in religious terms, but you've chosen to trust someone without guarantees. You've chosen to love knowing you could be betrayed. You've chosen hope when logic said despair. Because on some deep level, you know that living without trust is not life. It is merely biological survival. But there is something even more radical in what Dostoevsky is proposing. Because Alyosha's faith is not just abstract belief, it is concrete action. He doesn't debate theology. He goes out and loves. He listens. He cares. He forgives. He is present with people in pain. He doesn't solve their problems, but he is with them. And that presence, that willingness to enter into the suffering of another, to carry part of the weight, even without being able to eliminate it, that changes something. It doesn't solve anything philosophically, but it transforms practically. Dostoevsky is saying, the opposite of suffering is not explanation. It is love. Love that does not depend on understanding. Love that does not expect to solve. Love that just is present. And that is absurdly difficult, because you want solutions. You want explanations. You want to know that your effort will result in something measurable. But Alyosha shows you that sometimes love does not solve anything visibly, and you love anyway, because it is the only human response to suffering. This is not optimism. It is something darker and deeper. It is the willingness to face the abyss and not turn cynical, to see evil and not become evil, to experience suffering and not pass on only more suffering. And that requires something Ivan does not have: grace. Not conventional religious grace, but grace as an undeserved gift, as something that comes from outside of you, that you cannot manufacture through effort, that you can only receive. Alyosha receives it. Ivan refuses it. And the difference is not in intelligence. Ivan is more brilliant. It is not in honesty. Both are honest. It is in the willingness to be vulnerable to mystery. Ivan needs to understand before he can accept. Alyosha accepts without understanding. And paradoxically, it is Alyosha who is able to live, who is able to love, who is able to transform suffering into compassion instead of bitterness. You don't have to be religious to understand this. You just need to have lived long enough to know that there are things you will never fully understand. And you need to decide whether that paralyzes you or whether you act anyway. How many times have you avoided loving because you had no guarantees? How many times have you avoided trying because you weren't sure of success? How many times have you been paralyzed waiting for perfect clarity that never came? Alyosha shows you another option. Act in uncertainty. Trust without proof. Love without guarantees. And yes, you may be wrong. Yes, you may get hurt. Yes, you may invest everything and find that you bet on nothing. But the alternative, Ivan's security, the lucidity of the man in the underground, that alternative is not life. It is slow death by excess of consciousness. And there is something else. Something that Dostoevsky does not say explicitly, but shows through his characters. People who suffer deeply and choose love over bitterness become different. They develop a depth that sheltered people never develop. A wisdom that does not come from books but from scars. A compassion that is not sentimentality, but recognition. I know what that is because I've been through it too. Father Zosima, Alyosha's mentor, teaches something radical. Everyone is responsible for everyone else. Not morally in the sense of guilt, but existentially in the sense of interconnectedness. When one person suffers, all of humanity is diminished. When one person is redeemed, all of humanity is elevated. This is not a metaphor. It is spiritual reality. You are not isolated. Your choices echo. Your suffering touches others. Your love, even if it seems small, even if it seems useless, changes something in the invisible fabric that connects all beings. And that means that every act of genuine love is an act of cosmic rebellion. Rebellion against emptiness, against nihilism, against the idea that nothing matters. Ivan rebels by rejecting God. Alyosha rebels by loving even though God seems absent. And perhaps this is the most radical rebellion, because it is more difficult, because it does not offer the comfort of justified anger. It offers only the weight of responsibility, the responsibility to love in a world that does not guarantee that love will prevail. You can do it, not perfectly. No one does it perfectly, but you can choose moment by moment to be bitter or to love, to close yourself off or to open up, to condemn or to understand. And these small choices accumulated over a lifetime determine who you become. You become Ivan, brilliant, honest, desperate, or you become Alyosha, vulnerable, confident, alive. Both saw the same abyss, but they chose opposite paths. And now you are at that same crossroads. Dostoevsky will not decide for you. He only shows you the consequences of each choice. If you choose Ivan, lucidity, logical consistency, growing despair. If you choose Alyosha, vulnerability, constant risk, the possibility of meaning. There is no third option. There is no safe middle ground. And maybe, just maybe, that's the point. Maybe Dostoevsky is saying that life has no definitive answer. It only has choices. And you become the kind of person your choices create. If you choose security, you become the Grand Inquisitor, controlling but spiritually dead. If you choose lucidity without love, you become Ivan, correct but desperate. If you choose analysis without action, you become the man in the underground, understanding everything, living nothing. But if you choose love without guarantees, vulnerability without protection, action without certainty, you become something that Dostoevsky considers the only thing worthy of being called human. And that brings us to what he really meant, the final synthesis. The only answer he offers, not an answer that solves things philosophically, but an answer that makes it possible to live. And that brings us to what Dostoevsky really meant. It's not about having faith or not having faith. It's not about solving the problem of evil. It's not about proving that God exists. It's about something much simpler and infinitely more difficult. Active love. Not love as a feeling, not love as romance, not love as comfortable affection. Love as a conscious decision to carry the weight of another. Father Zosima on his deathbed says to Alyosha, "Love man even in his sin, for that is already the image of divine love and is the greatest love there is on earth." This is not poetry. It is a surgical diagnosis of the only antidote to the existential poison that Dostoevsky spent the entire book distilling, because all other options lead to the same place: emptiness. Rationalism without love becomes sophisticated cruelty. Freedom without love becomes self-destruction. Faith without love becomes fanaticism. But love, genuine love, which asks for nothing in return, which expects no compensation, which just is, that transforms everything. It doesn't solve anything, it doesn't explain anything, but it transforms. And Dostoevsky is not talking about abstract love for humanity. He is talking about concrete love for that specific person in front of you right now. Not loving humanity while despising individuals, but loving the confused, contradictory, flawed individual who stands before you. And that is brutally difficult, because that person may not deserve it. They may hurt you, they may reject your love, they may never change, and you love them anyway. Not because they deserve it, but because you choose to love. Because love is not a reaction to the value of the other. It is the creation of value in the other through recognition. When you genuinely love someone, you are not approving of everything they do. You are recognizing that underneath all the mistakes, all the defenses, all the masks, there is a human being suffering and trying to survive, just like you. And if you can see that, if you can see through the anger, the fear, the superficial cruelty, and see the suffering that caused it, then compassion is no longer optional. It becomes inevitable. But that doesn't mean passive acceptance. It doesn't mean letting people destroy you. Zosima also teaches, be firm as a rock but gentle as water. You can set boundaries and still love. You can say no and still have compassion. You can protect yourself and still not become bitter. This is the synthesis that Dostoevsky offers. And it is rare, because most people go to one extreme or the other. Either they love passively and are destroyed, or they protect themselves completely and turn to stone. But there is a third way. Love that is strong enough to set boundaries, but flexible enough not to break. And you learn this only through suffering, not through study, not through analysis, but through the experience of being broken and having to choose, to turn to resentment or to turn to compassion. Raskolnikov only heals himself when he stops justifying himself and accepts his crime, when he stops trying to prove he was right and simply feels the weight of what he has done. And then little by little, through the love of Sonia, a prostitute who also suffered, who also fell, but who chose love over bitterness, he begins to transform. Not instantly, not magically, but gradually. And that process is painful, because it requires the death of the ego. It requires admitting that you were wrong. It requires total vulnerability. Most people would rather die than do that. Literally. They prefer to maintain their defenses, their justifications, their illusion of being right until the very last moment. But those who succeed, those who go through this death and are reborn on the other side, they become something different. Not saints, not enlightened, just real humans. Humans who carry scars but not poison, who have been broken but not destroyed, who have seen the abyss but chosen not to become the abyss. And these are the only ones who can truly help others, because they know, not theoretically, experientially. They know what it's like to want to give up. They know what corrosive anger is. They know what paralyzing despair is. And they also know that it is possible to get through it and come out alive on the other side. Dostoevsky does not promise happiness. He does not promise that everything will work out. He does not promise that suffering will have a clear meaning. He promises only one thing. If you choose love, you will become more human. And being more human, in the profound sense that he uses, is the only thing that is worthwhile. Because you can be successful and be empty. You can be right and be miserable. You can be in control and be spiritually dead. But if you have love, love that bleeds, that hurts, that costs everything, you have something that no logic, no achievement, no explanation can give you. You have real life. And maybe that's what was missing at that moment back in the beginning. When you woke up, you accomplished everything, and yet you felt that nothing was enough. That was missing. That thing that cannot be bought, achieved, or rationalized. That thing that can only be chosen and lived. Real connection, real vulnerability. Love that does not protect, but transforms. Dostoevsky spent his entire life mapping out all the wrong paths, all the escapes, all the illusions, all the dead ends. And in the end, he points to a single way out. Not an easy way out, not a safe way out, but the only real way out. Love as rebellion, love as a gamble, love as a conscious choice not to become what the world makes you. And you can choose that. Now, today, not perfectly. You will fail. You will backtrack. You will protect yourself when you should open up. You will close yourself off when you should trust. But if you keep choosing, moment after moment, to try, just to try to love when everything in you tells you not to, something changes. Not the world. First, you change. And then perhaps through you, something in the world will change too, imperceptibly. But really, Dostoevsky didn't write to give you answers. He wrote to wake you up, so that you would stop living on autopilot, stop accepting ready-made narratives, stop pretending to understand when you don't. And now that you have seen, now that you have recognized the underground man in yourself, the temptation of the Grand Inquisitor, the capacity for evil that you carry, Ivan's revolt in the face of suffering, Alyosha's absurd choice, now there is no going back. You are awake, and being awake hurts, but it's the only way to be truly alive. Dostoevsky gives you no peace. He gives you consciousness, and consciousness is a burden, but it's also the only dignity you have. Because now you know you are choosing. You know that every day you decide between paralyzing lucidity and liberating love, between sterilizing security and life-giving risk. And knowing this doesn't make it any easier, but it makes it real. And real, however painful it may be, is better than numb. After all this, tell me, if your life is the battlefield that Dostoevsky described, between lucidity and paralysis, between reason and love, between security and freedom, which battle are you losing because you won't even admit you're fighting it? Write in the comments, not for me, for yourself, because naming it is the first step toward choosing. Watch the next videos on the channel, count on me, and follow the White Rabbit.